Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Minority Men's Health Matters series, the March program, where we are going to focus on nutrition. And we are delighted for each of you to join us. Right now, we have over 40 participants, and we are very grateful for each of you for spending your time with us this morning and being advocates for your health. I want to bring greetings on behalf of the Emory Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. My name is Crystal Davis, and I serve as the Senior Project Support Specialist for Outreach. And I also bring greetings on behalf of Dr. Monica Parker and Ms. Cornelia Dorbin, our project directors. So today we will feature Mr. David Orozco as our feature panelists, but I also would like to let you know we have our esteemed panelists and planning committee who are always joining us, who you've seen on previous sessions, Dr. Cornelius Flowers, who is a cardiologist and a staple for our program, as well as Mr. Karen Graves. And joining us later, we will also have Mr. Clinton Dye and Mr. Robert Broadwater. So I would like to begin with introducing you all to Mr. Orozco. David Orozco owns Orozco's Nutrition LLC, which is a nutrition and wellness practice in Atlanta, Georgia. And he is also the host of a podcast titled One Small Bite that helps people build a secure relationship with food and their body through an anti-diet, weight-inclusive, and self-compassion-driven approach. He brings thought-provoking and vulnerable conversations about controversial topics around fat phobia, weight stigma, and body shaming. Mr. Orozco has been in practice for close to 20 years as a registered dietitian nutritionist. He is a certified intuitive eating counselor, an exercise physiologist from ACSM, and he's a Quit Smart smoking cessation counselor. Mr. Orozco is also fluent in Spanish, and he loves to work with the Latinx community and other marginalized community. Mr. Orozco finds cooking to be cathartic, and he has even auditioned for season 9 and 10 of the Master Chef TV show with celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay. He loves the outdoors and anything hiking, biking, and camping, and he holds the rank of 3rd degree black belt in the Japanese martial art of Aikido, which he served. Sir, Mr. Flowers, I'm sorry.
We won't mess with him.
Oh. And he has served in numerous boards and positions at both the state and national level for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietitians and Dietetics. More importantly, he loves time with his family, his wife, his daughter, and his dog. And we are just very elated to have him be our featured presenter today. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Mr. David Orozco. Mr. Orozco.
Crystal, thank you so much for that introduction. That's really sweet. Despite having a 3rd degree black belt in Aikido, I think I'm a pretty okay person. I don't think I've actually ever used it. Well, that's not true. I think I've used it on a friend and I hurt him by mistake. So maybe those hands are lethal. Maybe I should register them. I don't know. What it did made me think, Crystal, when you read that was, wow, I need to shorten my bio a little bit. But thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate everybody's time, and I greatly appreciate Emory and Crystal's team, this minority men's group, for having me on. I will tell you that my presentation today is going to be very, very simple, and I think will be very profound at the same time. I don't know if anybody here has ever seen a registered dietitian nutritionist before. If you had, that's great. I'd love to see what your experiences by seeing a dietitian or a nutritionist have been in the past. And I'll kind of let those come through the chat. If anybody can use the chat, I'd love to do that. But if you can turn your camera on, I'd love to, if you want to say something, I'd love for you to share that as well. But one of the things that I'd like to ask you all is something very, very simple. I'd like to ask you a very simple question. I think it could be very profound at the same time. But I'd like to ask you all, what is healthy eating to you? And again, we can either put your answers in the chat, or feel free to just turn your mic on or turn your mute off and just blur it out. What does healthy eating mean to you? I feel like Jeopardy. I feel like singing that song. Do, 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 do.
Well, I will stop that song.
Okay.
This is Cornelius Flower. I think healthy eating to me means eating the kind of foods that will help me live healthier, longer, and more productive without it adverse affecting my body system in a negative way, whether it tastes good or not.
That's good. That's good.
Now, and I also, as far as healthy eating, I like to try to control the portions. I know growing up, I probably overate because it was good. So, but now at 75, the weight comes on faster and the blood pressure goes up. So I try to watch what I eat as far as the portions are concerned, because I also am concerned about the quality of life. I mean, if I can't eat at least some of the things that I want, then that's not a quality of life for me. So I probably will slip off the rails at times and eat me some, and I will eat some fried chicken and some collard greens and chicken and dressing.
Okay. Okay. I see on here, Jerry Houston put in healthy eating is balanced diet. And Brian here, Brian Huerta put in here, I think of that plate of portions that we got shown in school constantly. Oh, that's very interesting. I'm glad that you're bringing that up. Let me see if I can share my screen. Am I allowed to do that? Share my screen?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. I made you a co-host.
Okay, great. Let's see if I can share this somehow. Okay. I'm going to show you from my Canvas screen because for some reason I don't have it, but let me make it a little bit bigger. I think in the past, one of the things that Brian was alluding to along with Jerry, this balanced diet, is sort of something like this that we've seen in the past, where we get an image of a plate of food. And so balanced diet, as Jeremy, I believe I'm getting his name wrong, but mentioned, it's just this combination. There are 6 food groups, right? Fruit, vegetables, grains, proteins, fats, and dairy. So these are the 6 main food groups: fruit, vegetables, grains, protein, fat, dairy. Okay, it doesn't matter which order, but generally speaking, these are the 6. What this balanced plate leaves out is the 7th category. Can anybody guess what the 7th category is? I'll go with these again: fruits, vegetables, grains, dairy, fats, and proteins. What would you think is the 7th category? And I think Karen, Mr. Graves mentioned this a little while ago. What do you think is the 7th category?
Haven't the slightest idea.
Pleasure eating.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Flowers. Beautiful. Yes, I really want to put that in there because you probably saw in the plate that I shared the importance of pleasured eating. There is a really good body of research that is showing that when we look at centenarians, the research on blue zones across the world, we look at people that are living to close to 100 years or longer. One of the things that they find, yes, it is generally a plant-based eating style where 80% of the foods that they eat come from if you look at the 6 food groups: fruit, vegetables, grains, excuse me, and some fats, okay? So generally, these are all plant-based, right? But generally speaking, oops, excuse me, I don't know why that's happening. Let me go back, leave. Generally speaking, what it leaves out is things like chocolate, things like bread, things like pasta, things like, again, what Mr. Graves had mentioned a little while ago, fried food. Some people put Matthew, sugars. Daniel put chocolate. Carolyn, yeah, very good. Alcohol, caffeine. I know you're kidding, but believe it or not, it is very, very important to recognize that we live in a society, we live in a world that have these things available. And to exclude them completely from your diet creates an increased desire. So fundamentally, what I'm saying is that deprivation, unlike, now, of course, alcohol, we can leave that one off on the side because generally speaking, we do not need alcohol to live. But every other food, regardless of its sugar or candy or desserts or pie or fried food or fast food, we need food to eat. And the problem is that when we start dieting, when we start going into a keto diet or a fasting diet or a high protein, low carb, or a high carb, low protein, or a vegetarian or a vegan style or plant-based only, these are all helpful. But we live in a society that all of these other foods are there. And so I know it may sound like it's a bad thing for me to suggest that it is totally okay for people to have chocolate or sugars or carbohydrates or fast food. But one of the single greatest problem that I see, especially as we age, is that we start cutting out foods at a time when our bodies are also breaking themselves down, the natural process of dying, right? We actually, in order to slow that process down, we need to be able to eat enough foods that provide the energy to keep that rate of degradation slow. Again, so when we look at people in these blue zones, these centenarians, they actually get a lot of foods that they enjoy in their lives, along with a lot of the plant-based foods. So that's one thing. Let me also add one other part. The other part to eating isn't just the ingredients, the nutrients that are in food, the things that fuel our body, but nourish our soul. If you hear my podcast, one of my 3 taglines is chopping diet culture, fueling your body, and nourishing your soul. Eating is experiential. Eating is filling yourself with sustenance, yes, but you're also eating a food. So I'm going to make one more example, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion, because I know the conversation that the topic that I'm giving you can actually be a little controversial. So I'm going to open it up in a minute. So here is what I mean by that. If I were to ask you the following, do not think of a red apple, what happens?
You think of a red apple?
Of course you do. The human brain doesn't have a way of separating an image that you are already familiar with from the word don't. Now I want you to think of the exact same experiment this way. Don't think of maracuya. I can see somebody's face, some people's faces like, what the heck is that? So it's very easy for you not to think of maracuya. Maracuya, by the way, is a South American food. It's a fruit. You don't know what it looks like. You've never had it. That's a perfect example of experiential eating. So when we're eating, when we avoid some of the things that we enjoy, one of the things that tends to happen is that we exclude something that fills our souls. And there is a very strong neurophysical reaction to eating along with the physiological functions of digestion that really mesh themselves in the process. It goes back to Mr. Graves' a point. Fundamentally, what I'm really saying, and I hate to dumb this down a little bit, but it's kind of like everything in moderation.
Mhm.
That's really what this is. So I'd love to leave it up to open this up to questions and discussions, because I know what I'm saying can be a little controversial, but it looks like we already have one question from Crystal. Good morning, Mr. Peters. Do you have a question? Would you like to turn on your camera and ask? Mr. Peters, would you like to turn on your camera and ask a question?
His hand is raised, so and we'll keep it moving. And Mr. Peters, we will definitely address you if you would like to ask your question.
Okay.
But if any of our panelists, Dr. Dye, Mr. Broadwater, Mr. Graves, Dr. Flowers, while we're getting questions, do any of you have questions?
I have one. It's interesting about your comment about moderation. But how do we deal? Basically, what we're dealing with is the fact that a lot of the engineered foods that we're exposed to creates a hyperactivity in terms of being so palatable that it's designed to make you eat more of it. You like potato chips, you can't eat one. A lot of that with salt and fat and everything else that's put in our food makes it so palatable that it's very difficult for individuals not to eat a lot of it, even though the whole question about moderation is a good one. That seems to be most of the things that we struggle with more than anything else.
So, Dr. Dye, one of the things that you are mentioning there is you're talking about the engineering of foods and how it overexcites our stimuli and makes us want to eat more. I would counter that with, imagine how you would feel if I told you you couldn't have it. What is worse? Is the engineering of that food that supposedly gets you to eat it, or is it the forced autonomy or the stealing of your autonomy? What is it in the United States and around the world as humans that we fiercely fight for? It is not the potato chip. Yes, for food, but we fiercely fight for our freedom, our independence. And so when I say to someone, you cannot eat chips, what I am ultimately doing is giving the very food industry that manufactured that food to make us want to desire it even more palatable. So one of the things, let me give you an example. I have a client who's a truck driver. I saw him just yesterday. And he said to me, one of the things that I've been working on with him was getting into a regular schedule of eating, because as you all know, truck drivers, they don't have a great schedule. I mean, they're all over the place, right? They're driving into the night, they're driving into the morning, they're then turning around, sleeping in their cabin for a couple hours, and then driving to another place. And he has problems with his blood sugar. Well, his blood sugar is matching his erratic eating. So one of the things that I worked on with him is getting him to have a regular schedule of eating. At 8 o'clock, always have something to eat at 8 o'clock. So he said to me yesterday, he said, well, David, last night I had ribs because I was out on a job and, it was the only thing that was available. And so this morning I still stopped at 8 o'clock and I had one more rib left. So I ate the rib. And he said, but I didn't go inside to the vending machine at the place because, they have a lot of junk in that vending machine. And my mind went, this guy needs to eat more. This guy needs to eat more. This guy needs to eat more. He has no energy. And he's driving a 10-ton bullet. And so one of the things that I said to him is that, look, there are 5 food groups. The rib is a protein. If you would have gotten some chips at the vending machine, you would have gotten a carbohydrate. If you had some fruit, one of those fruit cups, now you would have had a fruit. And then maybe if you had milk, or if you had almond milk, you would have had a dairy, you got the calcium. So you have at least 4 of the food groups. And so one of the things that was important was me saying to him, no, go ahead and have something from the vending machine, because what you're eating is not enough. The reason I said that to him is because he said to me, when I had that rib, in a couple of minutes, I was hungry. That's a good thing. We want to eat. But again, going back to your question about manufactured food that's overstimulating to us, partly the reason that it's overstimulating to us is because we've told our society that those foods are bad for us. So what I'm getting at is giving a friend or a client the ability to recognize that the hunger that they may be feeling should not be sacrificed for the food that they may need.
I think also,
yeah, go ahead.
You know, for myself, which Dr. Flowers pointed out that I'm a controlled diabetic, because I asked him the question, well, if my A1C went up to 7.5, but because of diet and exercise, I got it down to 6.2. Well, now am I not a diabetic? Which he said, yeah, you're a diabetic, but a controlled diabetic. So the one thing is that everybody has to realize what your health, what your condition is. Okay, I realize that if I don't pay attention to portion size and some of the things that I eat, then my A1C will go up even higher. So even though I allow myself to eat certain things, I try to do it in moderation, and where I might eat a full plate of potatoes or whatever, then I don't eat as much. But I do that because I know that I'm working on my health, and these are some of the things that I need to do. So I don't eat like I used to eat.
Yes, and that's a very good point. That very last part, you don't eat the way you used to eat. Yes, of course, for a variety of reasons. As we age, your tastes are going to change too. The volume of food that you can maintain will probably change. And of course, because of your health, absolutely. I do not do the work that I do in the absence of someone's care. My focus is on beneficence as much as malfeasance. And so if someone is aging and they're losing weight, I have to question whether the weight loss is better than, not eating enough. Well, no, I'll say that in the, losing weight is better than not eating. And quite honestly, I just don't see that benefit. I don't see that the weight loss is better. I don't ignore a person's A1C. Again, our truck driver, his A1C when I started working with him was exactly what you just said. It was about 6.9. And just by finding a regular schedule of eating at 62 years of age, just by finding a regular schedule of eating, we have been able to not only get his A1C down to 6.6, doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a huge change in just 3 months. He hasn't lost weight, but he tells me, David, I'm sharper, I have more energy, I feel less hungry, I manage my portions better. Dr. Parker asked a question. She says, what about myplate.gov as a dietary recommendation for aging adults? What is good nutrition? So the MyPlate from the USDA is a great guide that has come in light of the old-fashioned pyramid. I think you might remember that. I think one of the benefits to the MyPlate is that now it actually shows you on what to eat because you've got those 6 food groups. So if you look at a plate, and I'll try to find an example of that plate in just a second. If you look at that plate, it's telling you to essentially have these food groups in various quantities throughout the day. And what you'll probably see is about 80% of the food that's on that plate is essentially carbohydrate based. Fruit, vegetables, grain, and dairies are generally a carbohydrate, more or less. And so I think that that plate, as far as nutrition, is helpful. But Dr. Parker, I don't use the word good or bad. And here's the main reason why I don't use the words good or bad. If we tell people that this is good nutrition, and we tell people that chocolate would be, or chips, like Mr. Graves had mentioned a little while ago, is bad food, it infers the same about their self-worth. Or when a person eats it, it infers the same about that individual. And so one of the things that we want to try to avoid is that idea of making the person feel good or bad or indifferent. And I think that that's where we end up having a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you the plate that Dr. Parker is talking about. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with it. We've got the grains, the fruits, the protein, the vegetables, the protein, the dairy. You don't see the sixth food group, which is off on the side somewhere, which is the fat. But we use fat to spread on grains or to cook the protein, or there's fat already in protein. There's fat already in dairy. There are some vegetables like avocados, olives, nuts, seeds that contain fat. So while this plate is a good starting point, and I know I am using the word good, it's a good starting point. It does not mean that we have to always eat like this, because to do such would mean the opposite as well. If I don't eat this, then it might say something about my self-worth. And again, I'm not trying to use a lot of psychology here, but what I'm trying to get at is the importance of enjoying some food. What you don't see on this plate are things like what Mr. Graves mentioned, chips, or chocolate cake, or pastries, or candy bars, or even soda. Yes, I'm even mentioning soda. So I think it's very, very important. I do want to show you something else along with this. Here's something that's really interesting. When I ask people, how many calories do you think you need in a day? Most people will probably say somewhere between 1,200 calories and 1,800 calories. I want to point out, most of us that are aging, what the average caloric intake is for your just general daily function. Most of us are probably between the age of 61 to 76. If you're an active individual over the age of 76, 2,400 calories. If you had thought 1,200, this is literally twice as many calories. And so this is one of the reasons why I think it's very important. If I were to try to have 2,400 calories of 3 of these plates, it would be really, really hard, because half my plate is just fruit and vegetables alone. And so this is why it starts getting very, very complicated. If I try to use the plate as an example of how you're supposed to eat, what ends up happening is then I am not good, or I won't be able to do it. And then you feel frustrated. And later down the road, you're like, oh, I can't keep up with this because this is a very difficult way to eat. And so this is another reason why I stay away from words like good or bad. And I focus on, okay, how did what you ate made you feel? How did it help you? Like Mr. Graves had mentioned, did it help lower your blood sugar a little bit? And I'm not looking at a person's singular blood sugar, like postprandial, meaning 2 hours after they've eaten. Yes, I'm looking at that, but I'm also looking at a pattern over time. Oh, okay, so we're adding a little bit more vegetable into your routine. Okay, Great. And then at the end of the week, I'm seeing that the blood sugar on average is starting to come down a little bit. Oh, okay. That's working out. That's balancing out a little bit. I hope that answers Dr. Parker's question. Sweet is one of Hans things to stay away from. Sweet is one of the hard things to, oh, good. So Barrington Riley says, sweet is one of the hardest things to stay away from. And that actually goes back to what Mr. Graves was saying a little while ago. Yes, it is very difficult to stay away from, but I think it's very, very important to not fear it. Because again, the confrontation is going to be greater if we try to stay away from sweets, but it becomes much more easier over time, especially working with someone who does this for a living, is to learn how to incorporate sweets in a way that when you eat them, it's no big deal. You can have a little bit and you're done. It's not to say that every single time you eat sweets, you'll only have a little bit and you'll and you know everything is going to be great. Don't get me wrong. Even I, from time to time, will end up eating way too much sweets because I'll feel it. I'll be like, oh, that's too much. So I hope that helps a little bit. So maybe it's not a question that you're asking, Barrington, but one of the things that I'm trying to say here is one of the ways to manage your sweet tooth, how to consume sweets, is to actually confront it, is actually to learn how to do it instead of trying harder and harder and harder to always avoid it and always avoid it. Not that I'm saying that you're doing that. Okay, here's a question from Keith. Why is dairy still a food group? Isn't it bad for you? Again, this is another point of bad or good. The main reason why dairy is a food group is because it is singularly the best way, at least in the United States, the best way that we get three main nutrients. One is protein, but the other two are the more commonly heard of, calcium and vitamin D. So this is the main reason why dairy is still a food group. Interestingly, aside from that, dairy is actually one of the most complete foods out there because dairy contains carbohydrate, lactose, protein, which is whey and casein, and fat. All the three macronutrients that every single human needs. And this is one of the other reasons why it's still a food group. I hope that helps answer your question. Provide an example of sweet incorporated in a diet. Okay, very good question. So oftentimes people will say, well, you know what, I'll have a fruit instead. So oftentimes I say to a person, all right, if you want to incorporate a sweet into your diet, choose whatever you want. Chocolate, candy, Sour Patch Kids, dessert, cake, but have it in a way that you are going to be present with it. Sit down and enjoy it. Try to have it with no distractions. So what you end up doing is you start listening to your relationship of the food, that sweet. You will be surprised. Every single time I do this very simple pausing exercise with clients, one of the things that I often hear is, David, it didn't taste the same. Yeah, because the vast majority of times we're probably consuming that sweet very distracted, very rapidly, or we're really busy and not even paying attention. And so we might be wanting more stimulus, but it might be because of the distracted nature in our lives. We're overwhelmed, we're fatigued with decisions, so on and so forth. So I hope that answers that question a little bit. Again, to Dr. Parker, one of the things that I am saying is no sweet is off limits. It's really building a positive relationship, a more secure relationship with that food. Running away from any sweet is not going to be helpful. With that said, just to add a little bit to this, from time to time, there are just some sweets we don't really need. I mean, generally speaking, soda is a good example. We don't need soda to live, but I see people drinking it on a regular basis, even diet soda. And my perception of that is for two main reasons. One, it's a hydration. It's 98%, 97% water. So it hydrates you. But the second is caffeine. If it's, of course, a diet soda. So caffeine is the other reason. And then the third, there is a third. Sometimes we want a carbonation or a bubbly because it gives us that texture in our mouth. But generally speaking, we don't need soda to survive, to live. So sometimes if you can find a way of not having a certain sweet and it feels comfortable, I'm also not against that. I'm also not against giving up chocolate or something, as long as there isn't that substitution problem that happens in the future. And in my experience, there are very few things that we can give up in life when it comes to food that then doesn't have some kind of substitution happening later on. A vegetarian, if they've been eating meat and they suddenly become a vegetarian, sooner rather than later, they're going to use meat substitutes. It's a substitution, right? And so sometimes what I end up seeing is people consuming more of other things because they're not consuming enough. So again, I know I go a little too far. Yeah.
So if I like sodas, but I don't drink them on a regular basis, and primarily during the week, pretty much, I'm drinking water with all of my meals. Okay, but then we may go out to dinner or whatever, and I'll get a soda. So does that work? Does that work?
Perfect. You literally exactly mentioned moderation and this coming to a place where you are confronting the sugar in a way that is helpful for you. Think about one of the things that you said here. You're doing it when you're going out with family and friends. So what you're doing is not just having the soda because it's soda, you're having the experience of drinking it and eating it. So you're not filling yourself just with sugar. You're also filling yourself with an experience. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. We want to learn how to eat in a way that is balanced. And let me tell you, balance is one of the most difficult things to accomplish over time, but it can be accomplished over time. A lot of us are looking for a quick fix. And in our aging years, that's not going to happen. You've got to unlearn everything that you've learned and then relearn something new. That's twice as much work at an age where you don't have the time to do that anymore. So what we need to do is slowly allow ourselves something to change. John Collins put here, growing up, I had soda 3 times daily. I gave it up in 2007, tried a sip of Sprite about 5 years ago, and it tasted different. Yeah, I'll tell you about my experience in a minute. Maybe a formula change. Did not like it. No, I think, John, one of the things that you're actually saying is I gave up soda because my mother ended up having diabetes. This was way before I became a dietitian and before I knew all of what I know now. And then I haven't had it since, 2000, 2001. So going on, what's that, 23 years, 22 years or 21 years. So when I had soda a few years back, first and foremost, I went, oh, wow, this is really sweet. Golly, that's the first thing that I had. And the second was the very same experience. It just didn't taste the same. Yeah, it could have been a formula change, but I had the exact same thing. A Coke, a regular good old fashioned Coke. And yeah, it didn't taste the same to me, but that's okay, you know. So why is everyone, let's see, he is saying stay away. Why is everyone saying to stay away from meat products? I think it's partly that comes from Barrington. I think Barrington, this comes from the recent stance that the WHO and the CDC have taken on meat and the possible carcinogenic effects over a long period of time. There are, what are those? I think it's hydroxylic compounds that are produced in the cooking of meats. Maybe one of the other physicians in the team here can probably fill this in, but I can't remember if it's hydroxylic. I think it's hydroxylic, but I may be wrong on the nomenclature there. And what happens is that the browning effect of the meat releases these hydroxylic compounds that could potentially be carcinogenic. And so we believe that there is a higher incidence of colon cancer and other cancers due to the high consumption of meat products in our diet. I think, quite honestly, in the United States, I think we just do consume a considerable amount of meat, a very high amount of meat. When I go back to those blue zones and the centenarians, people that are living to 100 years, we also are seeing low levels of cancer, including colon cancer, as well as dementia, Alzheimer's, and other neurological conditions in these centenarian groups. But they do consume meat. I'll give you one example, Sardinia in Italy. In Sardinia in Italy, there's a population in Italy that have one of the largest per capita of centenarians around the world. And they actually consume about 10 to 15% of their diet from animal meat, beef, pork, chicken, or other poultry like turkey, fish, and dairy. And so, but they consume a smaller quantity, much smaller quantity as well. And so there's another group of centenarians in the United States. They're located in Loma Linda, California. This is part of the Seventh-day Adventist group of population. And they actually consume no alcohol. Alcohol is not part of their diet. Whereas people in Sardinia, Italy, they consume alcohol every day. So it's kind of this balance, so to speak. Yeah. So I hope that helps. I want to slow down here because look, it's 45 after the hour, and I have already taken up a considerable amount of time. Crystal, Dr. Flowers, you tell me, should I stay on a little bit longer, or what would you like?
Yes, please. And I know you have another obligation. So just wrapping up, there were a couple more questions. Another one from Mr. John Collins. He wanted to know, how are other countries getting their calcium and vitamin D?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, that's a really good question. So vitamin D, the fundamentally best way to get vitamin D is from the sun. So we actually have vitamin D on our skin. It's in a non, what's the word that I'm looking for? Oh gosh, it's not, I can't use the right words, but it's not converted into the active form of the vitamin D3 that we need. So sun exposure is the best way to get vitamin D, okay? The vitamin D that we need supplemented in our diet actually does come from food, but that vitamin D is actually supplemented, or what they call fortified, in food. But other cultures around the world, when we're looking about, for example, at Asian cultures, one of the ways that they're getting calcium is actually from a lot of the vegetable-based foods, the plant-based foods that they're eating, and as well through seafood. So there's a lot of calcium that, for example, in phytoplankton and in sea plants, as well as in non-swimming fish or seafood. Think oysters, mussels, clams, shellfish, so on and so forth. So we get it from that, and they tend to eat some of the shell of things like shrimp and other animals. The other thing too is that sometimes in the fish that they're eating, they make stews, or they eat the fish along with very small amounts small amounts of broken bone pieces. So they'll get the calcium through that as well. So that's the two main ways to get calcium and vitamin D. As far as the vitamin D, depending again on the culture, they might be getting it more from other foods like fish, because vitamin D is naturally occurring in animals in the sea as well. So those are the ways. Good question. Any other questions, Crystal?
I made a comment on that. Also, stuff like sardine and the herring, those things are very high in calcium and
Yes.
and vitamins, that kind of stuff. So that's why our diet is very important.
Yes. And again, if we talk about centenarians, there's another group of centenarians. It's Okinawa, Japan. 80% of their diet is going to be plant-based with their main source of protein coming from the sea. Yes. And they eat a big variety of fish. So yes. Sorry, Crystal, go ahead.
No problem. There's a comment in the chat from Mr. Collins that said he heard you get vitamin D from mushrooms. Is that accurate?
Yes, you do. You do get from certain types of mushrooms, not all. It is naturally occurring in certain mushrooms, shiitake, maitake, oyster, and other types of mushrooms will have varying levels, but yes, you'll get vitamin D from that. To be honest, in the United States, it's very, very hard to get a considerable amount of vitamin D for two main reasons. We work indoors a whole lot, so we don't get enough sunlight on a regular basis. That's number one. And number two, we use a lot of sun blocking material, women with makeup and men with clothing. And so we don't get nearly as much exposure. On top of that, the problem with sunlight exposure is skin cancer. And so we want to be careful of the overexposure on our skins, depending on the pigmentation of your body. So vitamin D in mushrooms is a great way, but you could also get it from fish, as Dr. Flowers mentioned a little while ago. Keith raised his hand, I see.
Let's see. I'm going to promote Mr. Keith to a panelist, but while we're doing that, there's a question that came in the Q&A a bit earlier that says, does the time of day that you eat make a difference? And what is the most important meal time? We hear that time and time again. Breakfast is the most important meal. Do we want to debunk that here?
Yes, let's go ahead and debunk it. There isn't any perfect time. Quite honestly, the research has not shown any perfect style of eating, whether it's 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day, 2 meals a day. What we do know that is extremely important is that the body needs a regular, structured routine of nutrients and energy sources throughout their waking day. So that generally would equate to an average of 3 meals and 1 or 2 snacks a day, depending on the individual, their age, their activity level, so on and so forth. As far as breakfast, in my mind, for me, breakfast is extremely important. For me, for myself, not for other people. For me, breakfast is hugely important because it helps me regulate my glucose levels. It helps me provide the energy that I need. It helps me sustain myself. You can tell how passionate I am. And so that requires an enormous amount of energy. And if I skip breakfast, forget it, I'm dead to the world. Whereas my wife, she doesn't eat breakfast much at all, but she eats good amounts of food throughout the day later on. So it doesn't matter as long as I'm getting a variety of the food groups and the foods that I want throughout the day, and therefore not feeling unsatisfied or hungry. Those are indicators. Now, if I'm feeling hungry because it's 5 hours after I've eaten last, that's perfectly normal as long as you're going to eat. But going further without eating is important.
So that's a great segue to a question that I have. We hear so much talk about these days, intermittent fasting. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. That's my answer.
Okay.
Don't do it unless your whole life you've not had breakfast and your health is okay. And if that works for you, great. But if you are used to eating something in the morning or having regular meals throughout the day, I would say don't bother doing it. It really was designed originally as a way to shock your system. With that said, religiously, in the history of mankind, we've had fastings. We still do Ramadan, Lent. We've had variations of fasting throughout life. And that is just part of your culture or ethnicity or religion. And that is totally okay. What we want to try not to do is think that that is the best way of eating. Really, what I do with clients is help them focus in on what is their best way of eating, what's going to give them the energy that they need, the ability to sleep better, to function mentally, so on and so forth.
Great. And there was a question great answer, thank you. There was a question in the chat that said, can you talk about gut health? Mr. Collins has heard that we need to eat more kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and he doesn't like those things. So what else can you do to promote good we don't use good, but gut health?
Well, this could be a topic that I can spend the whole day talking about, because gut health is something that I see a lot of clients for on a regular basis. If you don't like kimchi and fermented foods and stuff like that, one of the things that I tell people is really think about from food 3 things that are going to help your digestion the most. We all know one of them. Can anybody tell me what the main one is that everybody knows? When you're having like constipation, what do they tell you to do? Get more of what?
Water.
Fiber.
Water.
Fiber, right. Fiber is the main one, right? And then Dr. Flowers, and I think Dr. Parker might have been the other person that said water. Yes. So regular bowel movement requires 5 things: fiber, water. The other thing it requires is a lubricant, healthy fats. So think of olive oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, peanut oil, avocado oil, those kind of oils, right? But you can also get nuts and seeds and avocado and other sources of fat there. So a lubricant, some source of fat. So fiber, water, lubricant, fat, and then eating regularly. If you're eating regularly, the process of eating creates a neurological signaling to the place close to your rectum, okay, your anal rectal area, to stimulate the release of, I'm sorry, I know this is getting a little too deep, but what it does is it creates a regular cycle of your digestive system. So eating regularly is another thing that helps your digestive system. So that's the 4th. And the 5th has nothing to do with food, and that is movement. Movement helps the peristalsis function of your colon. And so flooding your blood, your colon with blood on a regular basis, meaning moving throughout the day, helps your colon function adequately and pushing along the waste through your body. Hope that helps.
So you just added the other major factor in reducing cardiovascular morbidity: exercise along with eating properly.
Yes, sir.
I know you run out of time, but could you comment on leptin and ghrelin?
So leptin and ghrelin are 2 hormones that are produced in reaction to your hunger and your satiety. So ghrelin is your let's get eating, and leptin is I'm full, stop eating. So these hormones are generally based on, released by the brain by the tactile, the neurological connections to your stomach. So as your stomach expands, sends a signal to the brain to release leptin. Leptin will then say to you, hey, I'm full, stop eating. Whereas as the stomach starts shrinking and you're needing to eat again, same signals, it's a food feedback loop, signals to the brain, brain releases ghrelin, and ghrelin is, hey, it's time to eat again. So it's your hunger hormone. The problem is when you're not eating on a regular basis, one of the things that tends to happen, and this goes back to Mr. Graves' question about portions, or comment about portions, maybe it was yours, Dr. Flowers, but when we start eating in large portions, we start creating a problem where the signaling then becomes interrupted or damaged. And so we can actually be desensitized to those hormones and either eat very little or eat a lot. And so that's one of the things where we get a dysfunction. But those are 2 antagonizing hormones that are in homeostasis. Those are the balances. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like intermittent fasting, because it affects your hunger and fullness cues and screws, excuse the expression here, really screws up that balance, that delicate balance of those two hormones. Does that help a little bit, Dr. Flowers?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. And also, when ghrelin, if you have improper sleeping,
Good, that's another
ghrelin
one.
is higher, then it promotes you not only to eat a larger meal, but also to eat the wrong kind of food.
Well, I don't use the word wrong, but
Eat a different kind of food. How about
there you
that?
go. There you go. But yes, sleep is another big part. When you wake up, so your circadian rhythm has 5 cycles in the evening, and your glucose levels match that. And so as you're waking up, your liver is going to dump a little bit of glucose into your body to give you a little bit of energy. That is going to create a feedback loop that then, because your liver is emptying, that then ghrelin, it gets released saying, hey, I got to store my fuel back into my liver again, get something to eat. And so one way that Dr. Flowers is mentioning is when we're not getting adequate levels of sleep, that hormone balance is messed up. And so this is one of the reasons why a lot of people will say to me, well, David, I never wake up hungry. And so when we look at their sleep, a lot of their sleep is damaging that delicate balance. So very good point. I'm glad that you're bringing that up. You're all bringing up the 5 areas that I work on with people. Those are the 5 basic human needs. Every single human needs to do: eat, sleep, move, digest or hygiene, and connect.
Outstanding, Mr. Roscoe.
So
Thank
many.
you. So,
All right, with
was
so
there another
many
question?
bad diets out there, that's probably promoting, the bad science of cutting calories. Healing your metabolism is important too, and you're talking is pretty radical about more fuel.
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little more?
I'm glad that you're saying that, because if you hear my podcast, you're going to hear my anti-diet approach. Yes, it is radical. It is controversial. Actually, I sometimes butt heads up against some physicians because I'm okaying things like chocolate. But one of the biggest challenges is exactly what you're mentioning, Mr. Broadwire, about your metabolism. When we have so many fad diets going on, what we're really doing is we're messing up our metabolism significantly. Yeah.
So eating more, maybe.
So eating not more, but eating enough is so important to help bring that metabolism back to a place where it's in homeostasis. Next time I meet with you all, remind me to talk about my all-rig analogy about metabolism. I think that will really help you quite a bit.
Thank you.
I love it. And we just appreciate your time, Mr. Orozco. We know you have to leave and you'll be back. And because there was a question at the beginning of the program, and after reading your bio, that said you work with smoking cessation. And so there was someone that wanted to know about that. So maybe you can incorporate what you do with smoking cessation in your next presentation next month.
You got it.
We would love to have that. But thank you for your time. Any final remarks from our panelists or Dr. Parker, anyone before Mr. Orozco leaves us? But we're going to continue the program. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your... Say what, Mr. Graves?
I say thank you for allowing me to eat some of the things that I love.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be a part of this. I'm really excited that this is a bunch of guys and much like me, Colombian American, and I just love it. I think it's great. I love what you're all doing. So I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of this.
We're glad to have you, and we really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great
I'm going to leave. I'll see you all soon. Thank you, Crystal.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Dr. Flowers, I'm going to turn it over to you. We have a bunch of, some questions and things about the benefits of coffee and things. So as a cardiologist, certain things that we have as a regular staple of our diet, what would you say as far as cardiovascular risk factors of having coffee on a daily basis? Is there too much, too little? Do you recommend it as a stimulant, or, some of the health effects that you see from your clinician's perspective?
Well, one of the things that I thought was important that he mentioned also in his talk was that our body needs nutrition. As we get older, our body begins to break down, our cells break down, and the dying processes, and the objective is how do we slow that down? How do we slow that process down? And eating the proper diet and nutrition is good, but there are certain enzyme and cofactors in your diet that you can have in your diet that will help you decrease the rate of deterioration of your body. So you will live longer and be healthy and have less heart disease and cardiovascular disease and strokes. And in reference to that coffee, this has been a yin-yang thing going on for a number of years. Drink coffee, don't drink coffee, drink coffee, don't drink coffee. Well, coffee has some chemical called flavonoids, and there are about 8 or 9 types of flavonoids, and they are basically antioxidant. What it means, it helps prevent your body tissue, your cells, from breaking itself down, make them live longer, so to speak. Rather than your cell living a month or 2, it may live an additional week. And so that process helped reduce cardiovascular disease process. And there was a recent study that I found very interesting that came out that says that if you drink 1 to 3 cups of coffee a day, then you will reduce your incidence of cardiovascular disease. Now, let's get clear on this fact about drinking coffee. Now, what most of us do when we drink coffee, we put sugar, we put a lot of cream on it. Now, see, all that erase that benefit that you just got from drinking that black coffee. So if you drink black coffee, I'm not saying no sweetener, have very low cream, very low sugar. There is some benefit, but I don't know exactly what is 2 tablespoons or 3 tablespoons, but the more you put on there, it's like you're taking away that benefit of that coffee. And then after a while, then it may be detrimental to you to drink coffee if you're loading up with cream and sugar, because you are taking extra cream and sugar, and that's where the cutoff point is.
Well, Dr. Flowers,
excuse me?
Excuse me, let me do it 1 minute. Would you say then that a presenter a while ago would say that it doesn't make any difference whether you put the sugar or cream in there, just so you're doing it under pleasant circumstances?
Well, that's the other factor.
Would you agree with that? Is that something that we should kind of clarify?
No, that's a good point you just brought up. And you remember, I think on a previous discussion, I talked about in France, they had less heart disease in the past. And one of the reasons that we said that because the wine that they were drinking. So back 20 or 30 years ago, red wine, drink your red wine, drink your glass of red wine with your dinner. And as time passed, it became clear to us, some of us, as what the Frenchmen were doing. They would work in the morning for 4 hours or whatever hour, and they would go out at 1 o'clock and take a 1 hour break, lunch, sit down, eat dinner, drink wine, all relax, talk to the buddy about stuff, get stuff off their chest, all the fussing in the morning they had, they don't settle all that dispute. And then they go back to work in the afternoon. They have a very productive afternoon. So that process, there is antioxidant in red wine, but the process of relaxing, unwinding, getting that stress off your body, that's important too, as far as delaying that degradation of the aging body. So I think there's 2 factors in there. That factor is important too. But I do think that adding that cream and sugar is a negative. Perhaps the relaxation phase and sitting out for an hour at lunch erases some of that bad effect of sugar. And then overall, you may be better off with, putting the cream and sugar in there and drinking the coffee. But if you leave the cream and sugar off, or if you minimize, let's say this, I'm gonna go back to what the nutrition said. Let's not punish ourselves by not putting cream and sugar in there, because they're that emotional, the other factor we have to deal with. Let's just say, let's minimize the amount of cream and sugar we put in that coffee. Any other comment or question on that?
Yeah, I'm struggling with you. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get with you on that.
Well, life, just like the speaker said, and this is one of the things I try to tell my patient, to do the right thing is very hard. It's not easy to live right. It's not easy to eat right. It's hard. And one of the things we have to realize that it's hard, therefore, don't go out there and try to solve it in one day. Let's go piecemeal. Let's deal with this little part. Let's deal with this little part till we conquer that, and then we'll work on conquering something else. If you're gonna do an exercise program, and I say you got to walk 40 minutes 4 times a week. Now, if you hadn't done any exercise at all, you're not gonna make it. I mean, you may get out there and do it 1 or 2 days, and then you may like, this is full of crap. I'm not gonna do this. It's too hard. But thought out, do yourself 15 or 20 minutes, then you work your way up to the goal. That's my approach. That's what I recommend. I see a question there, said, got to go. Oh, yeah, something there. Okay.
We'll see you next time, Mr. Bussey. But Dr. Parker, do you have a question?
Well, I think I heard the dietitian say, you have to incorporate all of the food groups in what you eat. But a real important part of what he said for diet was regularity for good health. But he also said you should enjoy it.
That's right.
You should be enjoying your meal. So I put in the chat, and I know I'm not supposed to be talking, but I'm sitting here with my husband, so I have grace. You enjoy your coffee in the morning. You enjoy it more when you're the only one up, and maybe you're having a little milk and a little cream, little sugar in your coffee. So I guess that's what I took away from what he said. We eat to live, but we should be enjoying the food that we eat. And if we take more time to enjoy our meals and not operate from the position of deprivation, we're going to probably eat more healthfully.
That is correct.
Using the European example of they work really hard, but then they take a break and they sip on some wine or something else. They take time to enjoy. And so I think his idea of, and it's health, it's like there are several main food groups we have to incorporate, but not only do we need to incorporate them, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same form all the time. What are the more natural, more necessary nutrients? Do we really need soda? No, we drink soda because we want something fizzy, something different. So I enjoyed this talk. So I'm looking at a different way to look at things, but regularity, you want to fix constipation, fiber, water, fat. I mean, okay, I got that. I can do that.
Yeah, I thought that was good. I think one of the best things we can take away from this talk is, sure, there's old diets out there that's reportedly better than the other diet. There's no food group, but you don't have to do it. I mean, you can take a break. You can take a diet holiday. You need to be enjoying your diet. If you here in America, I mean, you work in the morning for 4 or 5 hours, you take a 30-minute, 50-minute lunch, you rush down, you grab something to eat, you chunk it down your throat, and you're back at work. There was no pleasure in that. There was no pleasure there. Where's the pleasure? Where's the sitting around relaxing, eating your meal?
Dr. Flowers.
Yes.
Could you address if a person is monitoring their blood glucose with a glucometer, how often they might do it, and what is a fairly good range that they should be looking to be in?
The first thing you need to realize is that your glucose does fluctuate during the day, depending on what you eat and how much you eat, and also on your emotional and physical stress. In general, you would like to keep your glucose, let's say between the range of say 70 to 80 up to about 120, 130. It's going to fluctuate. And what usually happens after the meal, it goes up, but your body produces insulin to keep it down, to bring it back down to a steady level. Now, if you will monitor your glucose, it is recommended that you do your glucose fasting, and 2 hour after, you can do it 2 hour after a meal. That's give it time to get back down to steady state from that cake you just ate. Your body should be able to, your insulin should be able to pull it down. And we used to tell people to get at 4 p.m. in the evening, and that's before their dinner. Now, I don't recommend people taking their glucose multiple times during the day unless you are a diabetic that is difficult to control, and unless you are a diabetic who are taking insulin, short-acting insulin, multiple times per day. Then you have to check it every time that scheduled insulin. If you are not on insulin, if you're diabetic on diet and on a pill, then I think once in the morning, fasting is good enough. And occasionally, if you don't feel right during the day or in the evening, take a sugar dance, because you may not be feeling not right. May not be the glucose, maybe something else, but it's good to know that it's the glucose. Now, if you, as mentioned before, if you need multiple checking during the day, there are machines that would do that for you automatically. I mean, sticking your finger every day, 4 times every day, can get to be painful and very costly. In fact, some of the insurance companies now, they will only approve of the little strip that you use to stick your finger so many times per day, use this once a day unless you're an insulin-dependent diabetic. So it's a cost factor involved in that as well. And if you was concerned about your glucose, get an A1C maybe once every 3 or 4 months. You can get a good idea. If your A1C is below 5.7, that will reassure you that your sugar is controlled. If it's 8 or 9 and your fasting glucose is 100, then you can say, hey, during that day, my sugar must be going up higher or something else is going on here.
Excellent point. Any additional questions, Mr. Graves?
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Please,
I'll
by all
be glad to
means.
hear what maybe some of the audience. If not, Chris, do you have another question on that list that I printed out?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I wanted to talk about sodium and salt in your health. Why is it that diets that are high in sodium and salts are bad, and what does the ramifications of the high salt diets have on your blood pressure, and why is an elevated blood pressure not a good thing? So can you go through each of those?
Okay. First of all, sodium. I don't know how many of you guys remember your basic biology in high school and early college. They talk about the permeable and semi-permeable membrane. Well, your blood vessel, if you eat a high sodium diet, then of course you will have high sodium inside your blood vessel. And if you have high sodium inside your blood vessel, your body tends to try to retain a normal concentration of sodium. In other words, the normal sodium range should be like 136 to 142. You eat high sodium, then that's gonna push that sodium up in the body, in the vessel, in the blood vessel. In order to maintain that sodium concentration, it needs to put more water. So your body will hold on to more water to keep that concentration steady. And think about what happened if you had a tire in your car. If you put more air in there, the pressure in the tire will go up. Same thing happened in the blood pressure, in your arteries. You put more salt and water in your blood vessel, the pressure rises in your blood vessel. Now, normally what would happen, your kidney and your adrenal gland will try to excrete that excess water along with some excess sodium into the urine. Unfortunately, there are certain people, more prominent in African American, that tend to have low renin, low activity in the adrenal gland. So they're not able to excrete as much salt. So there's a tendency to hold on to that salt. And there's been a lot of theory as to why this is an African American. You know, there's been some anecdotal, non-scientific ideas about when African Americans were brought over on the slave ship because they were not able to go to bed, urinate, they had to hold the urine, and they were dehydrated. And because of dehydration and not drinking water, not getting proper fluid, that the body was forced to change, to be able to hold on to salt and water for survival. But now we don't have to do that. We have plenty of salt and water around. We don't have to hold on to salt and water, but our body had to unlearn that process. Now, there's no scientific basis I know, but there was anecdotal process that people had brought up in the past. Nevertheless, we know that salt is bad for you in terms of raising the blood pressure. And of course, when you raise the blood pressure, you have cardiovascular adverse outcome like strokes, heart attack, kidney disease. And so we want to minimize those things by having a low sodium and low sodium diet. Now, when I say sodium, now that salt and sodium is not the same word. We use it as one word, but it's not the same word. There are different kinds of salts. There is a potassium salt. If you notice Martin table salt, you can get Martin table salt. There is sea salt. You know, there's some called no salt. What you do, look on there, you see that some of those salt are potassium salt. You see potassium chloride or some other chloride. Now, the potassium salt is not as harmful as the other salt. The sodium salt is the bad boy. The sodium is the bad thing. So if you was preparing your meal and you need a salted taste, you can choose other non-sodium salt to give it a little taste. Now, the use of sodium is an acquired taste. When you are a child, if you ever try to eat baby food doesn't have sodium in it. And as people grow older, as during your growing up, teenagers, we tend to eat a lot of food that has high sodium because that's what we have, McDonald's, the fries and all that stuff. And then we have, the taste is acquired. And so we tend to want to keep doing that as adults. I know when I was a kid, I drank whole milk all the time because that's what we had on the farm, whole milk, whole milk, whole milk. And as I become older, especially after med school, I sort of went back to the 2% milk and the low fat milk. And now if I try to, and I had acquired a taste for that milk. And now if I try to drink whole milk, man, that stuff tastes terrible. It's so thick and, I just don't want it anymore. And so basically, we talk about all these diet and what it tastes good. Those are acquired things that we have acquired. Think about the sugar we talk about. It tastes good. When you was a baby, you didn't know sugar tastes good. If you were never given sugar as a baby, and as you grew up, if you never had sugar, you would never know sugar tastes good. You would never have acquired that taste for sugar. You wouldn't care whether you had sugar or not. But once you get a hold of, like a drug addict, you get a hold of something that give you a high or something you call pleasure, for something you like, your body gonna want to have that, will crave for that. So So when I was a kid, we packed our meat in salt. That's how we didn't have a refrigerator in the country. We packed our meat in salt so it wouldn't spoil. That's what sodium is, a preservative. You don't want to preserve your artery, do you? So that's the benefit of those.
And any other panelists want to comment on that? Dr. Dye, I saw you unmuted yourself. Any comments on that? And we can have Mr. Orozco, when we have him back, talk about alternatives to salt when cooking. That's the biggest thing, is like, if I don't cook with salt, what can I cook with as an alternative? So we'll have him as a dietitian, nutritionist, delve more into that and provide more examples of healthier cooking next month. Any final remarks from our panelists as we begin to wrap up?
I think it was a great presentation. I have to admit that for me, a lot of what he was saying, though, are things that Dr. Flowers and, of course, that Dr. Parker and all of you always talk about in terms of your brain health thing. But I don't know. It'd be very interesting he kept talking about the psychological things in terms of how there's a balance. And I think that's very important, because that's what I was saying the other day when we were talking about when we do the thing on mental health and on behavioral health, how the nutrition part needs to be also a part of that. Because, even when we talk about feeling good and anxiety and stress, that feeds that same syndrome of eating. We get depressed. We want to feel good, as we say. We want to have food and enjoy it. At that time, we need it more because of the way we're feeling. But that also continues that same cycle, in terms of you eating the wrong food. And I would have to agree with Dr. Flowers. I think there are some wrong foods that we eat that, and then that just completes that cycle of being depressed. It is a whole cycle of keeping us in that kind of a dysfunctional cycle. But I can't help but wonder how some of what we say applies to, we talk about the marginalized population. They're not going to have a lot of choices for the food that we're talking about. I think that's why with the information that you sent the other day, Dr. Flowers, about the community food banks.
Yeah.
A lot of this, it sounds good to say we can do this, but people don't have a lot of alternatives in some cases. They've got to eat what's available to them.
Yeah.
They can't afford to buy what we're talking about. They have to buy what's there. They are depressed. They do have a lot of anxiety, which is going to tend to feed the idea of having to eat what you want and eat for pleasure. Like, for example, the point I was trying to make earlier with him, I was trying to get clarification that if you say that you have to find a balance between eating something or having food play the role of making you feel good, okay? My point is that the industry also markets what we eat, what we smoke. It'll be interesting to see what he says about smoking cessation, because if we remember during the period when the tobacco industry, even though we were talking about lung cancer and the effect that smoking has and, secondary smoke and everything else, it's interesting to see that during that period of time, they not only continue to have the sales of cigarettes skyrocket, but they even sold us longer cigarettes. You remember the Moors and all those that came out? We not only continued to smoke, but we bought even the cigarettes that were longer and everything else. And a lot of that had to do with the way that they marketed the sex appeal. It was cool. It was cool to have the more cigarette hanging out of your lips and that kind of stuff. So I'm just saying, I know about the psychological thing. I'm very much with that. But I don't know that some of the approaches that we were talking about could apply in all cases to all populations without us looking at the other issues that those populations are dealing with. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think what we fail to realize is that we are in a war with with the industry. I mean, the industry, they're trying to sell their food. They're trying to sell their produce. They're trying to sell their stuff. So they're gonna give us the sexy women on the TV, the cool guy smoking his cigarette, riding his bike, and we want to be like that. They're gonna give us that picture. They're gonna encourage us. But I think what we have to do is help encourage people to do the right thing. For instance, Dr. Dye, you mentioned the food. You may not have all the food that in a different neighborhood that the other neighborhood have. But how about let's teach people how they can cook those same food for a healthier choice. Let's teach them how you can cook it with less salt. And you know, as the dietitian mentioned, talking about cancer and eating meat. Now, my meat primary is fish and chicken. Now, when we cook those meat, we grill them, and all that charcoals, all that burnt, yeah, all that stuff is carbon. There are carbon in that meat. The carbon chain get changed around, get burned and oxidized, and some of that stuff may be harmful to our body. How about teach people how to cook meat without doing that? You know, and the other problem is the reason we have, you know, give the chicken the vitamins, give the beef all those shots of hormones and all that stuff end up in our diet. It's in that meat, all the hormones and all the antibiotics in the chickens, and all that. It's not real chicken anymore. And you know, like fish, you know, they found out we want people to eat fish and chicken, so they created the tilapia. The tilapia was a genetic modified fish. They said, let's give them some fish, man. They're easy to raise. We can sell these things, make a ton of money. And so that's what's going on. They're selling those cheap, crappy fish that everybody loves and making a ton of money off them.
Great point. Great point. Well, we would like to thank everyone for participating today in part one of our nutrition theme. And as Dr. Flowers just mentioned, we will delve more into how to cook healthier, give you examples of renal diets, different types of diets, cardiovascular diets, and all next month when Mr. Orozco returns. We thank you for your time and participation. I posted the post-event survey link in the chat, and it will also be emailed to you following today's program. The gift cards will be mailed in the oncoming weeks. We just had some supply issues, so they will be mailed to you as promised and honored for completion of the survey. We again thank you for your time. Thank you to all of our panelists, our featured panelists, and our planning committee and team. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was very good.